Today we have Rachel Bruno. She has a really incredible story, incredible in sort of a heartbreaking way. Thankfully, it's come to a place where, we're in a better place now. She's in a better place now, but she's using her story to fight for other parents and other children. So to tell you a little bit about her, she had her 2 sons kidnapped by CPS in a case where there was no due process. There was no real attention paid to the facts, and she ended up winning legal judgments in excess of $1.5 million. And now she's fighting for other parents. So thank you for coming onto our show today, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so could you give our audience just a quick summary of, I know it's hard to condense it, but just to give people an idea of what, your case entailed.
Right. So, as Robbie said, they were kidnapped basically in 2015. My infant son at the time was 7 weeks old, and I also had a 20-month-old son at the time. And I have a medical condition. I have seizures. I have epilepsy. And one of the main triggers to my episodes is sleep deprivation or interrupted sleep. So, if you have a newborn, you ain't sleeping. And the doctor suggested that I get a nighttime nanny, somebody to at least help me overnight so that I could get my sleep. And I woke up at about 4 o'clock in the morning with my son screaming. He was in the care of the nanny the entire night from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. Those were her usual hours. So 4 o'clock, he's screaming. I look at the clock. I'm like, okay, probably feeding him, changing him, something like that. He stopped crying. Then he started again. Then he stopped. Then he started. So I finally got up. I went to the room, and she had him swaddled inside the crib, was kind of, rocking him back and forth and shushing him. And he was just screaming. And she picked him up, put him in the burp position, and he stopped screaming. But he still looked really uncomfortable, making weird faces. And I asked her, am like, something happened? She said, I just fed him. He's really gassy. I said, okay, fair enough. Babies get gassy. And at this point, my husband is on a business trip out of state. I'm home alone with my 20-month-old sleeping across the hallway and the baby screaming. So I figure, why don't you go home? He's obviously not settling down. I'm awake anyway, so go home. So she left that morning, and I unswaddled my baby. I looked at him, checked for any rashes, fever, ear infections, anything I could think of at that point, and no physical signs whatsoever. So I just gave him skin to skin. He fell asleep on me. Next thing, 7 o'clock in the morning, the same scream again. And I'm like, okay, you're hungry. Last feeding was 4, so let's try again. And he refused to nurse. He would not latch on. He was just making these weird faces, and I was just, jaded, colic, nursing strike, gas, anything I could think of, Dr. Google to the rescue here. What is going on with this kid? My 20-month-old wakes up and is bouncing off the walls, so I have both kids by myself. 6 hours later, nonstop crying, no napping, no nursing. I finally call the pediatrician, and I say, I need to see somebody. I don't know what's wrong with him. He won't eat, and he doesn't have a fever. He doesn't have a rash. I don't know what's wrong. So the doctor says, we can't see him till 3 o'clock this afternoon. I said, he's been screaming since 4 o'clock this morning. I need to see somebody. So, okay, then take him to the emergency room. So at this point, I call my mom. My mom was with her husband who was having cataract surgery that day. It was a perfect storm. I'm like, please find somebody to take care of him. You come over here, stay with David, which was my 20-month-old, and I can take him to the hospital. So we all hop into the car. And of course, Lucas, the 7-week-old, babies love to sleep in the car. He stopped crying completely. Totally silent all the way to the hospital. And I'm like, great, right? Now here comes this overreactive mother to the emergency room with the baby sleeping. I get to the emergency room, tell them the symptoms, take the vital signs, everything was okay, seemingly, but they did put me right away to the room in the back. The pediatrician came, asked me what happened. I told him, since 4 a.m. he's been screaming. He told me to lay him down on the bed flat and walked away. Okay, weird. Thinking he's going to get some medication. He stops at the door, probably about 10 feet away from my son, and he's just laser focused, staring at my son. And everybody in the room is silent. Like, this is really weird. Then about 30 seconds, he walks towards the bed and goes straight to his head, right behind his ear. Like, did you feel this? I said, no. So he grabs my hand, makes me touch it. Like, you feel that bulge right there? I'm like, yeah. Like, that's fluid that's leaking from his brain. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? He's like, it could be spinal cerebral fluid or it can be blood. We need to do a CT scan right now to see what's going on. So as soon as he says that, about 10 people rush into that room. You know, they raise up the rails. I'm holding the baby. They're already intubating him. I mean, it was crazy. It was chaos in that room. I don't know what the heck is going on. You know, they're wheeling me down, and then his right arm starts twitching. And when his right arm starts twitching, they really start pulling that bed down the hallway. And I asked the nurse, is this normal? She's like, no. And me having seizures myself, I think that was the first moment that it hit me. Like, left side of the brain, right arm twitching, he's having a seizure. My first thought is, oh my God, it's genetic, right? I pass this on to my son. Say a little prayer right there. My God, please spare my son from having to live with this like I have for my whole life. We get to the CT room, doctors send me to the waiting room. I'm texting my husband who's on a business meeting, my 20-month-old bouncing off the walls. My mom is right there. You know, nobody knows what the heck is going on. We're just texting people and telling people to pray. Doctors come back like, Miss Bruno? Like, yeah, here. Takes me to the back and says, this is very serious. Like, okay. Like, the fluid that's leaking is blood, and the brain hates blood. It is a cranial fracture and intracerebral blood hemorrhage. We need to go to emergency surgery right now to see what we can do. So I'm signing all the liabilities. Do you have anything against blood transfusions? I'm like, I don't care what you do, save my son. So they wheel him off, and there I am. I mean, I'm just in shock, right? I went from gassy baby to my son is now going to have brain surgery. And at that point, it really didn't occur to me the fracture aspect of it. No, I thought he's a newborn. The cranium isn't completely formed yet. So I'm like, one of those flaps popped open. You know, the blood, could it be an aneurysm? I'm like, I was thinking a million different scenarios. Never in my mind did I think, you know, this could have been a malicious or purposeful
abuse
thing.
or something.
Yeah. So 4 hours later, the doctors come and said, you know, the surgery went well. Clinically, as far as we're concerned, we were able to drain the blood. We were able to fix the fracture. My first question, is he okay? Is he going to be brain damaged? And the doctor said, we honestly don't know. You know, due to his young age, we don't know if he's going to survive the next 48 hours. We have him in a medically induced coma right now because he was having a lot of seizures after the surgery, probably due to the irritation of the blood and the brain. So take me up to the PICU, and there he is. You know, has gauze wrapped all around his head, has tubes coming out of every orifice you can imagine. And again, I just pray for my son. I say, God, please don't take him away from me. Right? If I have to dedicate the rest of my life to taking care of my son, I will. But don't take him away from me. And I felt peace at that point. You know, I heard the Spirit tell me he's mine. Like, I gave him to you. Nobody's going to take him away from you. So at that point, I'm like, okay, yes, he's in God's hands. No better place for him to be than in God's hands. I called my friend to pick up my mom and my 20-month-old son who was still there. This was probably 9 o'clock at night. And she takes them home, and I'm there by myself. My husband is coming straight from his business trip to the hospital. And a few minutes later, the cops show up. Somebody knocks on the door. It's a man in uniform, followed by a woman with a clipboard. And, you know, they knock, Miss Bruno, can we speak to you? Thought it was weird. No, what's a cop doing here? But first words out of his mouth, you know, what happened to your son was worse than getting shot in the head by a bullet. We want to help you figure out how this happened to your son. Will you help us? So at that point, I'm like, of course, yes. You know, come in, sit down, tell them the whole saga from 4 a.m. till at that point at the hospital. Then he kind of starts prodding me. He's like, you know, why didn't you call 911? I'm like, because I didn't know what was wrong with my son. You know, she told me he was gassy. Why did it take you so long to bring him to the hospital? Because again, I didn't know. I was Googling gassy baby. I was trying a bunch of different things. I had no idea what was going on. Why did you bring him to a hospital in Orange County when you live in LA County? Because this is the hospital that I know. And they were just writing things down. And the social worker, do you have any other children? I do. Where are they? Their names, ages. I told them I have my 20-month-old son, David. He's with my mom. Like, is it okay if we go see him? I said, well, he's probably sleeping at this point. She's like, we're not going to wake him. We just want to make sure he's okay. So again, me thinking, I have nothing to hide. They're here to help me. So I call my mom. She leaves, the social worker leaves, and I assumed that she was on her way to go to my mom's house. At which point my husband shows up from the airport. The police officer grabs my husband, takes him to another room. He asks me to go to another room to wait for the detectives that were on their way. They wanted to speak to me as well. So my husband tells his side of the story. The detectives show up. They interview me till 2:00 in the morning. Mind you, I'd been up since 4:00. It was 2:00, and I told her, I really need to get some sleep. I don't want to have a seizure now. So we can continue this on later today if you would like. They were very cooperative, gave me the business card, and I went to bed. I wake up later that day at about 10:00 in the morning, and my husband is just staring at me, this blank stare at his face. And my first instinct, look at the baby. He's alive. He's good. What's going on? And he tells me they took David. What do you mean they took David? Who? Where? How? I call my mom. It's like the social worker showed up at my house at 2:00 in the morning with 2 armed police officers. And they came in our house. They checked the refrigerator. They checked the house. They told me to wake up the baby, wake up David, who was 20 months old. And she checked him out, took off his clothes. She said, we're going to take him. My mom is like, no, you're not. And the social worker, well, if you don't give him to us, we're going to have to arrest you. And my mom said, okay, if I go to jail, do I take him with me? And social worker, no, he's going to go to foster care, and you're not going to be eligible to care for him because you're going to have a criminal record. So at this point, 2:00 in the morning, my dad is in the garage calling lawyers. Of course, nobody's answering. My son is, noticing all the commotion and is starting to cry. And at that point, my mom really didn't know what to do. They're talking on their walkie-talkies. We're calling for backup, jurisdiction. And my mom, we had no idea what was going on. So my mom did give my son to the social worker. And he, of course, isn't cooperating. He's kicking and screaming and crying. My mom had to strap him into the car seat. And off they drove in the middle of the night without telling us where he's going, where they're taking him, why they're taking him. Just gave my mom the business card and say, call me tomorrow. So there's my husband at 10 a.m. calling the social workers, calling the supervisor. Nobody's answering. And I'm here, what the heck is going on? They lied to me. That's not what they told me was going to happen. So I'm calling lawyers, and I finally get a hold of a lawyer who would see me that morning. I went to his office, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? This is some sort of joke, right? Where's my son, and where can I go get him? And he's like, sit down. I sit down. I'm like, where is my son? They can't do this. He's like, you have no idea what you're in for. And I'm like, I didn't do this. I didn't do anything. How can they just take my son? And they're like, this is family court, and they can do whatever they deem is in the best interest of the child. I'm like, how is it in the best interest of the child to take my son at 2:00 in the morning, rip him away from his grandma's house, and now we don't know where he is? I'm like, what happened to the Constitution? What happened to innocent until proven guilty? What happened to the nanny? What the heck is going on? And he's like, yep, family court, they don't follow the Constitution. They may investigate the nanny, they may not. But as of right now, you're facing a criminal investigation, and you're facing 15 years in jail or $100,000 bail if they decide to charge you.
Wow.
I'm like, I didn't do this. And he's like, I believe you. It doesn't matter. So I'm just listening to this, and he knew where my son was. I was crying. I'm like, where is my son? He's like, I know where he is. Like, he hits a button on his phone. It's on speed dial. They had taken my son to the children's shelter, to the local children's shelter. And they would not release him to me. They would not release him to my husband. We had trial scheduled for 3 days later. It's a 72-hour emergency hearing. And my lawyer says, look, I'm not even going to fight for you. If I go in there and tell the judge to give the kids back to you, considering the fact that it's a criminal investigation, social services is going to go in there and paint you as a criminal. You're putting your children at risk. They're going to do this whole thing. They're not going to give your kids back to you. And if they're under 2 years old and nonverbal, they can be legally adopted by the foster family if the case lasts longer than 6 months.
Wow.
And they will make it last longer than 6 months. And so what are you telling me here? He's like, your saving grace is that your husband was out of town when this happened, was out of state. So legally speaking, he wasn't even at the crime scene. So I'm going to ask the judge to give sole custody to your husband. And if he grants that, then they're going to kick you out of the house. So at that point, what choice did I have? Like risk, having my children placed in foster care with strangers, or leave them with their father and, I pay the sacrifice, whatever. Like, I don't care what you do to me, just leave my kids alone. So we went into the courtroom that day, and I'm thinking it's going to be like Judge Judy, right? The judge here, one side says something, the other side says something. I get in that courtroom there, the nanny's not there, the social worker's not there, the cops aren't there. Nobody is there except for me and the lawyers. So they start speaking their legalese with the lawyer. And I'm thinking, when is it going to be my turn? Like, is the judge going to ask me what happened? Or, why I'm here, anything? Didn't ask me anything. I never got to say a word in that courtroom. So the judge just said, okay, Ms. Bruno, what your lawyer requested is granted. Children will be with their father. You have 24 hours to vacate your home. And a social worker, a caseworker, will be contacting you with a safety plan and visitation. Hit that gavel, court is adjourned. So it was about 10 minutes. And my whole life was just flipped upside down. My children were no longer mine. That's what it felt like. I didn't say goodbye to my son, David. The last time I saw him, my lawyer actually got us a visit at the shelter, right? Because they wouldn't release him to us. So we went to the shelter, and my son was a zombie. I mean, he was looking at me. He wouldn't come near me or my husband. I got on the floor, try to play with him. And he was finally coming around. He sat on my lap. And the social worker tells me time is up. You have to leave. So my husband and I get up. My kid is clinging to my leg, screaming, "Mommy, don't leave me, mommy, mommy, mommy." Social worker takes him. And my husband and I are crying like two school children, right? We are crying, walking out, hearing our son screaming in the background, and there's nothing we could do about it. So court was adjourned. I was court ordered to take parenting classes, child abuse classes, and individual counseling. I was given 7 hours a week of monitored visitation with both my sons. And meantime, I had nowhere to live, right? Kicked me out of the house. I have no family here. I'm an only child. My whole family's in Brazil. And they wouldn't let me live with my mom because my mom was with my son when he was seized. So I guess she was under investigation as well. I asked my lawyer, where the heck am I supposed to go? He's like, well, as long as your younger son is in the hospital, you can sleep in the hospital. It's a monitored facility, so they'll let you stay there. So I slept in the hospital for a few days until my mom went to our church and asked the pastor's wife to pray for us. And she came to the hospital one night. She saw my son, she saw me, she hugged me, and she said, I've been praying, and God told me you're coming home with me. So I went to go live with the pastor's wife, and we stayed there while all this was going on. And it was, it was heart-wrenching. It was disappointing. Me coming from Brazil, coming from another country, always assumed law and order in this country, due process, the Constitution. And all of a sudden telling me, no, that doesn't exist. They can do whatever the heck they want. I'm in the child abuse class. I'm thinking, what am I going to do in a child abuse class? I'm going to be in there with a bunch of drug addicts, abusers or whatever. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And when I get there, everybody's in the same boat as I am. Like, nobody had intentionally abused their child. They were all there as part of the safety plan to get their children back. So there were, playground accidents. There were bathtub accidents. There was an incident where a 15-year-old was posting naked pictures of herself on Instagram. And the father took away the phone, took away the car, grounded, did everything he could. And one night during his midnight shift, scrolling, he sees her posting pictures of herself on her friend's account. So, he comes home and he spanks her. Like, I don't know what to do with you anymore. Like, you are not posting naked pictures of yourself, and with all the comments, these men asking you a bunch of sexual favors. So she got mad at her dad. She called the police. The police arrested him, took all 4 of the younger siblings, placed them in foster care, and she was free and out on the loose at 15 years old. So I'm hearing these stories and I'm like, this is weird. Like, why? Just nothing makes sense. Like, one time is a mistake, 2 times a coincidence, 3 times now we have a pattern, right? Seemingly taking these kids for no reason.
We had actually like an experience in our own life that made us sort of start to question things. So I have a relative who she's young. She had some addiction issues and everything. And the child that she had was removed from her care by CPS. In her case, the child should not have been with her. So some intervention was necessary on some level. I don't know that it should be CPS, but somebody looking out for the welfare of the child should have said, hey, you're not fit at this point to be able to care for this baby. Where things went wrong was once this happened, I have a great big family, and my great big family, there's a lot of great people. I'm very successful. My wife is very successful. We have a beautiful home. We have all the money to be able to take care of a child. We offered to take care of the child. And we have no criminal record. We have no liens against us. There's literally nothing. I don't even have an outstanding parking ticket, like nothing. And they would not allow us to care for the child because we live in Tennessee. They then would not allow one of my other sisters to, because she was too close, in her sort of relationship with this other person. And then they ended up giving it to a stranger instead.
The other sister, they said, had too many kids.
Yeah, had too many kids already.
Unbelievable. Like,
and
no family members were fit to come in and rescue.
Out of a family of successful people and good people, I mean, like, you literally, CPS would be hard pressed to find a more perfect family to place a child with than ours.
Yeah.
And we were like, hey, we'll fly out there. We'll pay for everything.
Yep.
And instead they put the child with a stranger who's not his family and kept him there for how long was it? It was almost 6
months.
Yeah, it was like 6 to 8 months, something like that, until the mom was able to care for the child again.
And you know why, right?
Yeah.
You know why they won't give it to family?
Tell us.
Because the state doesn't get as much money for a kinship placement as they do for foster care.
Yep.
Right.
So, the state,
I think that's the type of stuff people don't know.
Right.
Will you elaborate on that and maybe go back a little bit to, the Clinton era and when this legislation started, changing the way CPS was run? Will you talk about that?
Right. Before CPS, child abuse within the law is criminal. Right. So law enforcement, police, federal court, if you're charged with if you're charged with child abuse, it's criminal. So, law enforcement would take care of you, would arrest you, you'd go to federal court and have your trial, have your due process, have all that stuff. But then CPS got involved, and basically anything can be considered child abuse. They call it neglect. Right? 87% of the cases are neglect, which can basically mean anything, right? It could be you're poor and your house is unkempt, your kids have holes in their shoes, they're not bathed, whatever. Anything can be considered neglect. And at that point, I guess foster care is supposed to be a temporary placement, right? As it should be. But there were way too many kids in foster care, not enough kids in permanent homes. So the Clintons, Hillary Clinton came up with her little plan, it takes a village. Let's speed up this process of foster care and find the kids their forever homes. That's another little tagline, their forever homes. So let's incentivize the states to speed up the adoption process, and we'll give them money so that they could pay for the attorneys, pay for the paperwork, the bureaucracy, all the stuff that needs so that the adoption goes on faster.
It's a business.
Definitely a business. And, it sounds great, right? Of course, kids deserve to be in a permanent home. They deserve stability. But the fundamental question that's never asked is, should that kid have been taken to begin with? Right? There is no due process. They just snatch your kids and that's it. And like my attorney said, within 6 months, my kids could have been adopted by a foster family. Even though I had completed all the stuff, they will find anything to hold against you. Right, during that process. And again, the states could send anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 per child per month that is placed in foster care. So before I even had my hearing, they asked my mom if she would adopt my sons. So the state is getting anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000. They offered my mom $670 a month per child. And they would be eligible for Medi-Cal, they would be eligible for WIC, they would be eligible for this, for that. And my mom's like, I don't want your money. Like, give the kids back to their mom, to who they rightfully belong. And the social worker said, well, this is how we help families. This is how we help you. So that's definitely any child that has money attached to their lives. I mean, what can go wrong, right?
And this is sort of my overarching problem with, too much government. When you have, there's not one thing that I can think of, and I think anybody watching would be hard pressed to think of something that the government does a great job, like some program, they do a great job administering to the people. I can't think of one. And that's fueled by, number one, the fact that it's so hard to fire government employees. Number two, the fact that there's very little, check and balance in terms of who you have to answer to. They're not truly answering to the public, the people who are paying them. So when you don't have to answer to the person paying you, to your boss, that basically, it leaves an environment where you can get away with a lot of things that you should not be able to get away with. And I think everything I've heard from parents who've gone through these things is there's a coldness, a callousness in which this operates. And that was our experience too with our family member who went through this, is there was a coldness and a callousness to the way this all worked that just was not, there was no value of family. And the state does not value family. It does not value familial relationships. Right. It believes that it knows best and that what it will do ultimately should just be, with not questioned.
Right. Yeah, no, there's no oversight. There's no accountability. And just to finish my end, my case went on for 6 months. They did let me go home after 40 days. So it was 40 days and 40 nights. I was kicked out of the house. They let me go back home. I basically signed a no contest plea. When they let me go home that day, I'm like, I don't care. If they tell me to cut off my leg, I will do it. Right. I just want to be home with my kids.
Right.
Yep.
So I went home and the case was open for 6 more months, where the social worker would visit our house every month. And her recommendation at the end of 6 months was that our case be closed. So thank God our case was closed. Everything was fine. But I just had this fire inside of me. I'm like, I can't be quiet knowing what I know.
Right.
Like, this is crazy, right? There's so many families suffering. I'm one of the lucky ones that I did have the financial means to get a good attorney, that I did have the family support. I didn't have a history of substance abuse or any kind of abuse, thank God. Like you said, you were completely clean and they still treat us like that. Can you imagine somebody who does have some sort of history? So I got in touch with a civil rights attorney, and he's very well known here in California. His name is Sean McMillan, and all he does is sue CPS. So I started calling him and we signed the petition. We opened the case, and this was April 2017. April 2017 we started. Then we started getting all the discovery, right? Which we really didn't have access to while the juvenile case was open, because to protect the minors, we can't see anything until they're 18. Mm-hmm. But I got the files and they vaccinated my son, my 20-month-old son, after they seized him. They gave him 13 vaccinations without our consent, without a court order, without a judge's knowledge. They forced my son through a full skeletal survey, which is basically taking an image of every bone in your body, where they had to strap him down to take this medical examination. They gave him an anal wink test, which is for sexual abuse, when there were no allegations of sexual abuse. And we just see the amount of overreach, right? And the power. I mean, they were just digging for anything that they could try to pin on us.
Right.
We had the depositions. The social worker came and gave her depositions. She admitted to taking our sons without a warrant. She admitted there was no exigent circumstance. The detective admitted that they didn't get a warrant. The detective admitted there was no exigent. I mean, they admitted everything. And like you say, the coldness, the callousness, they just act like nothing, right? They're talking, it's another kid, another family, another day. Mm-hmm. And I think probably the most hurtful thing to me while I was listening to them is like, they kept repeating, the mother should have known. Like, I should have known what? Like, they assumed I was guilty because I didn't know what happened to my son. And I'm like, I was sleeping, right? I didn't, she was, what about the nanny? Like they investigated, they went to talk to her one time after they'd already seized my children. And she told them that the baby was perfectly fine when she left. And they believed her and left it at that. You know, so again, going back to the cynicism, you know, and the stuff that we know about money, had they gone after the nanny, it would have been a criminal case. So social services wouldn't have been involved, right? It would have gone to law enforcement. There would have been no custody dispute. There would have been no family court. There would have been no funding. There would have been nothing, none of that, had they decided to go after the nanny. So instead, they come after mom so that they can fulfill their little quota, basically, of federal funding.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I saw the testimony, and I really encourage our audience, you know, to watch this, the testimony from these social workers, so you can see for yourself the kind of people that are in charge of decision making when it comes to your kids, and really get a grasp on that. And also, you know, the social worker that was in charge of your case concluded basically that you did it before even doing the full investigation, before even speaking with the nanny. Is that correct?
Yeah, we got their text messages. Their text messages exchanged between her and her supervisor. And she says she's on her way to the hospital. There is a case of an infant with a cranial fracture and a sibling. And her mom, sibling, or the baby was with the nanny. So the supervisor writes back, OMG, you think it was the nanny? And the caseworker writes back, no, think mom.
Right.
And that was her response before they even got to the hospital.
Based on absolutely nothing, knew nothing about the case at that point. It's
hadn't seen
insane.
The child, hadn't interviewed the nanny, hadn't interviewed the husband. Unbelievable.
So this system is totally broken. And I think one of the things that people are sort of unaware of, if you haven't, you know, dived headfirst into this topic, is how broken foster care is as well. There's a lot of families, or I shouldn't say families, a lot of people who, you know, they're in this for money, period. This is a job to them. Being a foster care, you know, being a foster parent is a job for them.
Right.
And I think that incentivizing that is part of what's broken here. And then there's the family side of it. You know, the fact that they're actually incentivized to not place kids with their family is another broken part. Mm-hmm. But then you go into the missing kids.
Right, 1,600 kids found dead in CPS every year.
That's another part. Nobody talks about that. You know, we have riots over one, you know, really horrible murder right now. But, you know, I think that we should be just as upset about 1,600 kids dying in, you know, foster care every year. Right. I think that's, you know, worthy of some outrage, you know. And of course, some of those are going to be natural causes, but there's a lot of those that are not. And you go into the missing kids too. Since the year 2000, over 62,000 kids have had their missing cases closed, despite not finding all of those kids. Right. And, you know, and that's not just aging out. That's not just these kids turned 18, so we closed the case. And there's sort of another darker side to this. As you think about that statistic, that's just the ones that you know, did go through these sort of weird closed case scenarios where, you know, we don't even have the full numbers annually on how many kids actually go missing, and we don't know their full stories. But you look at just that number with the closed ones, and you can extrapolate from that this is a really significant problem. And that's not just runaways. Runaways are 52,000 since the year 2000. So runaways are a totally different story. With missing kids, that's something totally separate.
Yeah.
So I think that these are things that, you know, we also have to have a conversation about and figure out, you know, how do we fix this?
What are some things you can tell our audience that we might not know about CPS, you know, policy-wise, you know, what's happening with the kids there? What is some good information that we should know about?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I learned is the lack of due process, right? There is no due process. I always thought that if CPS took your kids, you must have done something really bad, right, to have warranted them taking your kids away from you. And I come to learn, no, you know, they can take your kid away for anything. So, you know, we hear people calling the anonymous tip lines. It could be a disgruntled ex. It could be a neighbor that doesn't like the kids screaming. I mean, it could be anything. Anytime you call that tip line, they are legally obligated to start an investigation.
We've
right?
seen even political, reasons. We've seen political retribution. Right. We've seen, some Antifa or far left group go and call CPS on people.
Look what happened to the barber in, I can't remember what state this woman was in. Are you familiar with this case where she had her
in
salon,
Oregon, where somebody called CPS
yes.
on her over social distancing and all that stuff.
And so a CPS worker showed up at her house and tried to take her kids. I mean, this was used, systemically to control people.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's used to control and threaten and, really humiliate parents too, because just the fact that they show up at your door is in itself, even if you've done nothing wrong, it's a humiliation of sorts, where especially somebody who, say somebody has depression, but they're a great parent. You have CPS show up at your door, like that in itself can throw you into some sort of, real spiral that is not like, there's no reason for this. A lot of these things should not be taking place.
They could justify anything. I mean, if your kid's outside and you run inside to go grab their water, anything that's
they could say, they were left outside alone.
Is that the way that the system is currently set up? Any parent, you can try a ham sandwich. You could have your kids taken away.
Anybody, I think it could happen. Anybody can happen to anybody.
And so that leads me to, we have a viewer question. Oh Mercy Me said, in retrospect, how would you have, is there anything you would have handled differently knowing what you know now, and what, really for the benefit of any parent who finds themselves in a similar situation to what happened to you?
Call an attorney right away. I mean, what would you
have done
different?
Different?
That would find themselves in a situation like this.
I would have kept my mouth shut that night at the hospital when the police officer and the social worker came to interview me. They will do all the little psychological tricks on you. They were extremely friendly to me. They said they were there to help me. But the Fifth Amendment exists for a reason. So I would have said, I will be more than happy to speak with you after I speak to my attorney. So definitely, if you find yourself in this situation, and again, at my mom's house, when they showed up at my mom's house, they didn't have a warrant, right? We didn't know our rights. We didn't know that they needed me. We didn't know what the heck was going on. So if they come knocking on your door, show me the warrant, right? And if they don't have a warrant, then you do not let them in your house. You do not have to let them talk to your kids. You close the door and bye-bye, okay? You can be kind, right? You don't want to piss these people off. And it's not to say that they won't go get a warrant. They will.
Yeah.
But at least it gives you at least 24 hours to go find yourself an attorney, to go, get your business taken care of. And that's probably what I would have done. I would have kept my mouth shut. I would have called an attorney. I would have told my mom, go to a hotel somewhere so that they don't come knocking on your door and take away my son. Mm-hmm. And it is absolutely within your rights to say no. And I think that's what parents need to know.
I think the forced vaccination side of this is something that deserves more attention too. I'm not sure why we're getting feedback from my mic.
Right. So let's talk about that. Medical tyranny. I mean, what happened to your son? Does the state have the right to take your child and perform,
medical
invasive, psychologically unnecessary,
right.
unwarranted procedures?
Well, again, it goes back to the lack of accountability with social services, right? The social worker is the one who writes the report, and the doctor reads the report that the social worker wrote, right?
Yeah.
So the social worker who seized my son and took him to Orangewood wrote that there was a suspicion that this child was hit against the wall. That's what they wrote in their report. This person never spoke to me. This person never spoke to my husband. This is what they wrote on the report, and this is what they showed the doctor. And they showed the doctor this. Oh, look who's here.
Mama.
Oh, hi.
Hello. Mama, I want to go pee.
Okay, go ahead. Had to announce that he had to go pee.
Don't worry, we have our kids home too.
Yes.
So we're on the same page. It's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that this happened at Orangewood. So I don't even think that my wife knows this, but my cousin, I have a cousin that when she was about 13, she ended up in foster care.
Yeah.
And it was because she repeatedly kept running away. Her mom had passed away, and she was in the care of he was like an old uncle. He was really old, and she kept running away, and he couldn't control it, and so they decided to put her, again, instead of family, they put her in foster care.
Yeah.
And she kept running away from Orangewood. She ran away so many times from Orangewood, they didn't know what to do with her, and they eventually stopped looking for her.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So they gave up.
Yeah.
Orangewood gave up,
This
and
happens
the state
with all
gave up.
cases. I mean, after a certain amount of time's gone by, they stopped looking for kids.
Well, yeah, and so she ended up sexually abused by a homeless man. They stopped looking for her, and she ended up, basically they ended up finding her with a homeless guy, and she was still a minor child, that's crazy. I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yeah. It's still there.
It seems like there's still a lot of problems there.
Wow.
Still there, still a lot of problems. And even Secretary Pompeo, I think he said 67% of human trafficking comes from foster care.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to elaborate on. Depending on, where what the source is between 60 and 90%. And that's not accounting for all the unknown cases as well. I think it's really, this is something that I've studied and gone in depth in with the human trafficking. These traffickers will literally prey on foster kids. They know they're vulnerable. They know that they're desensitized to being moved around. And so they're very easy targets, and they'll wait outside a family court. They'll wait outside the schools to see what kids are left behind, what kids have to leave early for court. They will do that. They'll make whatever effort necessary to find these kids because they're so easy to groom. And that's what we have to understand is how many of these kids go missing, are dead, and end up being sex trafficked. The system is broken. It doesn't work. And we have to start having this conversation and talk about why we're not putting children with family members in any situation. Why is the default to give the children to the state instead of a family member that,
because again, in the case of my cousin, and this was a long time ago, this was when I was a kid too, she was a little bit older than me. And I remember that my family was willing to take her in, but again, they said no for no reason. There was no criminal record in my family. There was no issue. There was nothing. There was no reason why they should not give the child to my family. I mean, it was multiple parts of the family willing to do this.
Yeah.
And again, they ended up making this decision. And one of the big problems was at Orangewood, she was put with a group of troubled kids who were all troubled, and they were all leading each other into worse behaviors.
Yes.
So they all spiraled even further out of control than they were before they got there.
Right.
And instead of giving these kids what they needed, the leadership they needed, the counseling that they needed, the firm boundaries that they needed, because that's what they needed more than anything was firm boundaries from somebody who would also unconditionally love them. And they were not getting any of it there at that place. Instead, they were getting, hey, here's a group of other people who are screw-ups like you. Now, don't screw up. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. It's not a serious solution to any problem.
Human traffickers also will send in kids to this foster system to recruit, more victims. So that happens as well.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I mean, my son was only in Orangewood for 2 days, right? And he was 20 months old. But the trauma, I mean, I don't care if it's 1 hour or 1 year. Once it's been done, it's been done, right? I mean, he rejected me for almost a year.
Right. I can't imagine. That's unbearable.
How hard was the process to win the judgments, the legal judgments against them? Was that a really long process, or did they want to just be done with this?
No, the civil suit actually went on for about probably a year worth of discovery. I'm doing the depositions. So I have over 36 hours of depositions with the social worker, with the supervisor, with the detective, with the other detective, with the peace officer. And we started, in April. We started doing the depositions in May. Went on. We didn't have our first mediation until September of the following year, until September of 2018. And at that mediation, we go to the Ronald Reagan Center in Santa Ana, huge courthouse, federal courthouse. And we go to one room, they go to the other room, have the mediator coming back and forth. And we found out later that they didn't even send anybody who had the authority to write a check to that mediation. Like, they didn't care, right? We were just there all day going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And of course they lowball it, right? They start at around $200,000. That's what they offered us initially. And my lawyer's like, no, we're not leaving this for less than the 7-figure amount that we're thinking. And, the moderator would come and try, then I'd start crying to the moderator. I'm like, I'm not going to settle. I don't care if I go to trial and I win $1, right? This isn't about the money. This is about holding these people accountable for what they did. This is about me being able to look my sons in the eye and tell them that we fought for you and for every other child that is in this. I'm not going to take pennies for this. Right. So if this is what they're going to offer us, then we might as well leave right now.
Yeah.
So
and to anybody who might criticize going after them for money,
yeah,
that is how we can hold them accountable.
Right.
The more money that you can get out of them and the larger the judgment against them, the more of a point it makes that this is criminal what they're doing. Right. That you can't do this and have, basically, give us a payoff and we'll shut our mouth and we'll take whatever you give us. We're happy to get whatever we get. That's not getting the justice that you can get. So I think you did totally the right thing.
Yeah. So we settled with the hospital first, because even my lawyer, he's like, even if this goes to trial, the judge is probably going to throw the hospital out because the doctors aren't required to be investigators. They're not expected to be investigators. So going back to what the social worker wrote, that my son's head was hit against the wall. What's a doctor supposed to do? Right? A doctor saying, okay, this might be a critical case. I might have to do these medical examinations to make sure that this child is okay. Mm-hmm. So they will probably throw the hospital out. We can settle with the hospital, and we put in certain conditions for our settlement with the hospital. Like, okay, we'll settle with you, but you must train your staff, right, about what it means to have a warrant, what kind of medical examinations you can do. And also that the warrant has to have the current date on it. Okay, because the warrant they used for my son, it's called a general order, and it was dated 2008. And this happened in 2015that 2015.
Wow.
Crazy.
Crazy. So we're like,
that's
okay,
nuts. The judge could literally be dead in that order. So I'm looking at the comments from viewers, and, just in the people watching right now, I see that people who've had false allegations against them, foster care ruined my young life way worse than the reasons why I was placed there did. And then the process, somebody said the process must have cost a lot in legal fees. Most parents can't fight back. Do you think that's accurate? Is that an accurate?
Absolutely. And, that's why I did it. I knew I had the financial ability to do so. And I know so many who don't. I'm one of the lucky ones. I always say I'm one of the lucky ones. And even when the dependency thing started, my husband and I were going to buy a house. So we had a down payment saved, right? If it wasn't for that down payment, I don't know where the heck, we would have gotten the money for. But from 2015 until we settled in 2018, I'd say my husband and I were about $250,000 in debt.
Crazy.
So it's a lot of money. But, I had to do it.
Yeah. Sadly, this is not an anecdotal case. Your case, when you do some research on this, and anybody can do this, there's thousands of YouTube
stories
videos,
like this. Yeah,
websites. This is a real systemic problem. This is not an isolated incident that happened in Orange County and one here. No, this is nationwide. There is an abuse of the system. It's a systemic reform that needs to take place. And I often wonder, I think that CPS maybe should be abolished and that, you should be in the process. Yeah, so
if I had a choice. Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, can you please tell us, what can we do? What can we do locally? What can we do to advocate?
And what should be done?
Right. What is a solution to this?
Yeah, locally, it has to be some kind of legislative change. I've written to our representatives, and they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They really don't want to get involved. It's such a nest of, a viper's nest. There's so much money involved. There's so many people involved. There's so many different entities involved. Like I said, it's an industry. They've created an industry out of this where the psychologists get paid, the hospitals get paid, everybody gets a little piece of the pie.
Yeah.
So I think federally, if we would just defund ASFA, which is the Adoptions and Safe Families Act, which is what the Clintons implemented to give federal incentives to the states. I think that in itself would be a huge chunk if people didn't have the financial incentives to go after this. be it the foster parents, be it the social workers that basically need to justify their existence, right? Because if they don't have enough children within the system, they don't get the funding.
Yeah.
So, follow the money, nothing new under the sun, as usual. And again, we as a society, if you hear somebody that is in the system, take everything that is said with a grain of salt. Don't judge the parents. Don't automatically assume that they're criminals, that they're guilty, that the children are better off in foster care. Really listen to these parents. I feel that's what I've been most helpful. Like when people call me, I can't give you legal advice. I can only give you my experience.
Yeah.
But most of the time, they just want to be heard, right? They just want to be heard and be told, I believe you.
Yeah.
Right.
Because the system treats you like crap, basically, right?
Yeah.
Dehumanizes you, humiliates you, and they just need somebody to be there and say, I believe you.
I think, one of the powerful parts of your story is the fact that you were able to fight back because you had the means to. And I think that it can open a lot of eyes and let people know that, hey, there are so many people like me who just do not have the means. So this is going to hit people, that are in poverty a lot harder than other parents that may be in the same, scenario, because those parents have access to something that the parents in poverty or maybe just low income do not have. So I think maybe open some eyes to just how wide this, problem really is.
Very wide. I mean, I wish I could, start a nonprofit, like a one-stop shop where people could get legal advice, where people could get like the monitoring services. One of the most heartbreaking things is having the child taken away from the mother, like, 1 day or 2 days after birth, because they can't be monitored. If we had some kind of shelter where they're monitored, then we could legally fight that, saying, the mother and the child are here. We're mandated reporters, leave them alone.
Right.
Yeah. So I think these kinds of nonprofits, these kinds of organizations really need to rise up and help these families who don't have the money.
Right. Yeah, we hear a lot about family separation, at the border, but we don't talk about the family separation happening in our system every day.
In our country.
And that policy that isn't pro-family. And when we start, just breaking apart families, especially the ones that are disproportionately, affected, the ones that can't afford to fight back, you start, chipping away, what's already poverty. You start chipping away the family, and it just perpetuates a cycle of destruction. So I think it's important for people to understand, because I think there's some people that that defend CPS.
Yep.
They have to understand it's not just about these cases like yours where there's an abuse of power and an injustice. It's about, it's not serving the people even that are being abused, the children that are being abused. It's toxic for them. It's harmful for them. Their chances of being trafficked and killed are exponentially greater. So the system doesn't work on either side. So that's something that I think is really important for everybody to expand their awareness to.
Yeah, no, there are studies that actually prove that. Even if you are in an abusive home, you're better off being with your parent than in foster care. And when I mean abusive, I mean, sexual abuse, of course, that's awful. They should have some kind of intervention. Any kind of physical abuse, that's awful. But say your dad is an alcoholic, right? I know people who've had alcoholic parents, and later in life, they do get, the help they need. They do get better. But my friends, like, I would have been crushed had they taken me away from my father. Like, I love my father. I knew he wasn't well, but it doesn't mean he didn't love me and that I should have been placed with strangers. I mean, that would have destroyed me. Right. And that's what they do.
I had an alcoholic father, and had a pretty difficult childhood. And I still would say, absolutely not. I wouldn't go back and ask to be put in foster care, because I still got to see my grandparents. I still got to see my great grandparents. And those people shaped and changed my life, and if I had been in foster care, I don't know what would have happened to me, So I can say that as an adult now, I definitely, even being in that scenario, if I had the chance, I wouldn't change anything, I really wouldn't.
Absolutely.
Policy-wise, why isn't that, a priority? Why are children not placed with a family member, even during that inquiry phase where they're, trying to put the case together? And there might be a very valid reason the child needs to be, removed, but there should be temporary custody stay within the family. Let's go stay with grandma. And then it's not traumatizing for the child. Stay with an aunt. They're taking everybody has some member of their family they could put a child with.
That's a good person.
It should then go to a close friend, or church member that they trust. Why are we handing children to the state and expecting them to be able to take care of our children?
All about the money.
Nonsensical.
Even in my case, my husband wasn't even there, right? Like, why didn't social services just tell me, you can't go to your house, but leave the children with the father and the baby and everything's fine, right? And in their policies, that is stated in their policy that they need to seek the least minimally invasive force to keep the family together. Yeah. But they don't care who's watching them, right? Who are they accountable to? To nobody.
Right. And that's a bigger question too that I also would, challenge everybody to think about is, how far does this abuse go? Because when you have a state powerful system like this, it can be used to target people not following stay-at-home orders, or it can be used to target
so many
conservative
ways.
Families or
so
families of vaccine-injured children. There's all sorts of ways that it can and it is being used currently, to abuse the power that they have.
Totally abused, and I think people really discount that possibility that it can go down a really even more frightening path than it already is on, where you could literally end up in a place in say far left states like California, New York, where they say, hey, you were seen out not wearing a mask. So you can't have your kids.
Right.
Or, you refuse the coronavirus vaccine, despite the fact it's the most rushed vaccine in history, and you don't know what the safety actually and efficacy of it is. Your kids are going to be taken and they're going to be force vaccinated. I think those things, these are things that could really actually happen.
If we don't speak out about it now,
if something doesn't change.
Look at Australia. A man took his kids out for a walk in the stroller and he wasn't supposed to. And he had his kids literally taken away screaming right in front of him for taking them on a walk outside of their tiny apartment to get fresh air. That's the kind of abuse of power that this kind of system has. And if we don't speak out on it now, it's going to be too late.
It's already happening. The contract tracers are all out there here in California.
Thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to say to our viewers?
I think we pretty much covered it. And I think if you want, you can go to my website. I do have a PDF available where I say what 5 things you should do and what I have learned during this. So I think every parent needs to know their rights so that they can protect their family.
Awesome. And what's your website?
RachelBruno.com.
I have one really last quick question. I'm sorry. Whatever happened to the nanny? Was there any?
Oh, yeah. What happened to the nanny?
Nothing.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's unbelievable.
They never even investigated it.
They spoke to her once.
What do you suspect happened?
Well, I did get a private investigator when all this was going on, and no red flags except for the fact that her husband was a cop at the time. And her brother-in-law was a cop. So I don't know, make of that what you will.
I'd say that's kind of a red flag. I'd say that's a conflict of interest in terms of who's investigating what happened.
Right.
That's just horrible. And I think that, could definitely have played a role too in the fact that they tried to blame you for this. So, that also kind of goes hand in hand with abuse of power by the state. And I think that, it's an important story, and I thank you for coming on and sharing it with our viewers, because I think it's really powerful information for people to consider.
We're so happy that you're doing this important work. Thank you for doing that. You don't have to, and your voice is so important. And there's so many families that aren't able to tell you thank you, that are in positions where they can't fight back. So you're doing an incredible service, and you're a hero for doing that. And I'm so happy that your kids are with you, and that you're happy and they're healthy and you're doing great.
That's the best part of this, is that her kids are with her now.
Yes, amen. Well, thank you for having me on and for giving me the platform to be able to share this story.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, bye guys. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot about the foster care system, CPS, and I hope that this story opened up your eyes and illuminated something that is really it's a tragic part of our system that needs to change. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. All right, guys, as usual, thank you for joining us. You can always check out our website, growuplive.com, and help support us, help support our show, and subscribe on our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram, all that good stuff. Help us grow. We're here to grow with you and continue providing awesome content. Thank you.